Okay, class, I wanted to make a short video of how Taiga works to get you started, what it's going to look like to your project team somewhat. Realize I did post the link to the YouTube channel with the playlist for Taiga tutorials. The first few of those were going to be particularly useful, about 15 minutes worth of videos. This one is meant to be real short from a project kickoff perspective to help you get going. So when you go there, you're going to get an invite email. It's going to give you an email address. It's going to describe the process for logging in the first time. I've already logged in with this account, but this is the class account. This is the account that you will add to your, will automatically be added to your project team. When you log in, right now I have a few sample test projects. So you'll see the projects that you have along the right. You have one project for this class. Maybe you want to use Taiga for some other projects too. Go ahead, be my guest. But you have one particular project that you'll that will be for CST316. In here, generally, this will fill up over time with activity streams from your project and so forth. This is a new account. This is a new setup. Not much out here right now. I'm going to go straight to the project. In this one, it is a LabGet example, I called it. By default, you go to an activity stream. You have your gravatars for your team. But I'm going to go straight to the most interesting part. The most interesting part is to go to your backlog. Right now, I have an empty backlog and I have no sprints. Right? There's nothing in here. This is the product backlog area. This is a list of what your sprints are, open and closed. There'll be some summary information once you get going about the number of story points that you've estimated, how many you've done, and so forth. Brand new project. We don't have anything. So let's go ahead and start creating our product backlog. Let's add a new user story. It says right there. This is Taiga's dialogue for creating a new story. I like to start with the description. If you remember our user story note, the anatomy of a user story. In the description is where I like to put the as a whatever. In this case, this is a LabGet example. So maybe this is a project to help me manage the lab that I gave you on Git to upgrade it. So as maybe as an instructor role, I want to allow for more submission checkpoints so I can produce more detailed feedback. All right, as a role, what I want to do and what the benefit is. So I might create a short title for this, so I'll call this more submission checkpoints. Now, by default, I'll start in new. Taiga gives you the option to start in other states. I don't recommend that. Let's just stick with new. You can tag it if you want. So if you want stories to be related to each other, so I may tag this with submit. You can do multiple tags or whatnot. There's a little save icon here that comes up, and I can add multiple tags. I could add a second tag that says, in addition to submit, this is about feedback. Okay, and I save that one. All right, so that might help you if you want an informal grouping across your stories. That might help you, for example, when you want to create different options for your customer, different sets that may be included in a sprint backlog. But optional, not requiring you to use that. There are two things on here that Taiga does special that are not part of this class. They're not even part of standard Scrum. They're kind of, Taiga likes to do this. I don't care about these things. The first one is up here on your total points. You can't assign total points directly. Taiga wants you to assign them in one of these four buckets: UX for user experience, design, front end, or back end. We don't need any of that. So I don't actually care where you assign your points. I care what the total points are. If you want to allocate them across the four in some way, go ahead. Personally, I just picked the first one, user experience. Under there you can see, you can leave it unknown. You can have it a 0-point story. We'll talk about some of the value in doing that. And then you see these relatively incrementing sizes: 1/2, 1. 1 is twice as big as 1/2. 2 is bigger than 1. And so forth. It's kind of pseudo Fibonacci up until you get to 10, 15, 20. So you get to pick a relative size. All right, this is our relative sizing we talked about in the lecture notes. I might say that this is pretty important to me. Not top importance, but pretty important. So I'll assign it 15. under UX, notice the total points updated. I care about the total points only. So again, I don't care where you allocate these 4 categories. I just care about the sum that happens over here. Excuse me. The second thing down here is it says team requirement, client requirement block. I'm not going to go into that stuff either. Use client requirement. You're set. Create. Okay. So now I have a user story on the backlog. Notice there's a little voting feature here, so I can even have somebody can even vote for it. Some of the Taiga things can be difficult to kind of select. You hover in Taiga. A lot of times you hover over something, and that's when you get your icons to edit or delete these things. There's the points. So there's our user story. Let's go create a couple, 2 or 3 of these things. So let's say GitLab, as a student, I would like more information on the git stash command to make me a more effective Git user. All right. As a role, what I want to do, what my benefit is, I'll call this add git stash. I'll go to UX again. I'll say this one's moderately important. I'll give it a 5. Leave it new. I'm not going to tag this one. I'll call it a client requirement. Create. All right. Now I got a second story. Let's add a third. All right. As a, let's see, what can we add? As a student, I would like to get better formative, meaning direction, feedback, so I can learn Git more effectively. Again, following our template, go to UX. I'll say that this one's really important, the top 40. I'll go here, call this formative feedback. I'll tag it as feedback. I gotta save that tag. I will click it as a client requirement, and I'll create. Okay, a couple things to notice. First is we've created 3 things, 40, 5, 15. Now our defined points are 60 on our product backlog. I'm gonna want you to fill up that product backlog with at least 20 things. There should be more things than you need in your sprint at any time in the product backlog, which means the product backlog should never be empty. I'm going to take the highest story points of the top 2, and I'm going to drag them. Whoops, I can't drag them yet. I don't have a sprint. So the first thing I need to do is to define a sprint. Create a sprint. Sprint name, I want you to name yours by number. So this is sprint 1. Let's say I'm going to start it, let's say this Friday, and I'm going to make it go for 3 weeks till February 12th, and I'll create my sprint. Taking a little time thinking about that, chewing on it. Okay. You can actually create multiple sprints and map stories into multiple sprints at a time. That's not really pure Agile, but you can plan things out like that. Don't really want you doing that here. I mean, I guess you can set up your 3 sprints or 4 sprints depending on which section you're in, but really we're going to be dealing with the current sprint at the time that we're planning. So remember, as part of that planning process, we'll decide what things from the product backlog go into the sprint backlog. I'm going to say these highest value ones. So I'm going to drag that right there. There it goes. And I'm going to drag the next one, 15, and put that right there. All right. And let's say that's what I have. It tells me how many total points I have in here out of the defined points. I actually recommend well, I'm sorry, I clicked on the edit a sprint. I recommend you go to the sprint task board. And what you'll see in this view on the sprint task board is now I've got that starting point was talked about in your notes. I have the 2 user stories down the left side. Taiga automatically gives you one called unassigned tasks. That is a way to do these 0-point stories, meaning if you have some tasks that you want to do, but they don't contribute to story points, you can go here and create a task. So I can create a task saying, learn Taiga better. This is a task, not a story. I'll leave it unassigned because it's in new. I could say I am not really comfortable in Taiga yet, so I want to watch the tutorials. We're going to ignore this IOCanon block. We're just going to go ahead and create. And now I have a task there. What about our other ones? All right, let's look. Let's, for example, consider our formative feedback. I can click on it and get a description of that story again. I can start create. I can create additional tags on it. I can go ahead and create task subjects here and so forth. I have a comment stream that I can do here, and I can also see the activity from it. All right, so that was our initial creation of the story. I can also do things like modify some of the initial things we've done. I can also add a watch to it and add watchers to it. So by default, usually if you're assigned to something, you can watch it, but maybe you're an interested chicken, you're an interested stakeholder on a task, so you want to go ahead and watch this item. When you watch things, by default, Taiga will typically send you an email when the state of something changes or something happens of interest. Let's go back to the task board. I like using this dialog. I can create my tasks right here, or I can do them in bulk. So I can add, let's say, an individual task. I go to the task dialog for formative feedback, and I'll say define feedback template, define a structure for providing formative feedback. Again, I can tag it, so I can also group it under feedback like I did for the story, or I can create brand new tags. Again, start in the unassigned state. In this particular dialog, what I again recommend your team does right at the beginning of a sprint is to fill up the set of tasks. So let's go create a couple more tasks. So I have a bulk task one that I can do with one item per line. So maybe as part of formative feedback, define a timeline for feedback. I can define a temperature, or sometimes we use a streetlight metaphor, green, yellow, red, to give a simple metaphor, and deliver feedback over email, which sounds a little bit more storyish, but we'll go with it. This bulk insert will create 3 tasks in bulk, so I'll see 3 more pop up just like that. They all start in new and unassigned. Again, you can go ahead and assign it while it's in the new state, but in reality, what you should really do is take a task like define a timeline for feedback and drag it over to in progress and assign it at the same time. So at this point, your team members will pop up. I'm currently on here as CST316, but I'm going to add it to user Kevin Gary. It changes to Kevin Gary in that gravatar, so you know who has that. Again, for you, you should never have more than 2 of these at a time across the entire column assigned to you. So now I have a task defined. Maybe I'll take this one and I'll put it in progress and assign it to CST316. And now, I have some things in progress that I'm doing. And then there's also a set of open tasks. These are all the things not moved to closed as shown up here. So that's what you'll do at the beginning. You'll define all the initial set of tasks, but these are completely changeable again. So maybe I said, that streetlight metaphor is stupid. I don't want it. I got to do something else. So, I go in here, don't really want it. So I can go ahead and delete this one. All right, by clicking on it, I'll click delete and accept. And again, as pigs, as a development team, you change and modify the tasks all the time. And Taiga lets you to do that no matter what state it's in. Okay, so we're in progress. We're doing stuff. You're going to continue like this as you do the in progress. Notice that you have a task number here, number 11, number 13. Even the stories have tasks, It really just uses a counter. The more you create, the more the numbers just increment. That's the number you should use when you're communicating with your team. If you're holding daily stand-ups, for example, or multiple times a week stand-ups, then that's the number you should use. There's also another place that you can use this number. You can, over in your GitHub, enable a webhook that allows Taiga and GitHub to talk to each other. In Taiga, you can go to your settings, you can go to integrations, you can go to GitHub, and there's some information here that is provided so that you can do that integration. Realize that the GitHub integration, I will post this URL to Blackboard, is described here. You can go in and enable that integration. I've done that already. So, and it's very simple to configure. And once you have it done and you go over to your GitHub repo, this is the corresponding GitHub repo, then in your settings over here, you can enable webhooks. And I already have this webhook enabled. I've already done this one. You can look at the kind of information on here, and you can select all kinds of individual events that you do and get, and have those things be a means to communicate over to Taiga. What a webhook is once an action, one of these actions or events happens and is completed, GitHub will send a message over to Taiga. The interesting integration for us is that we are going to support when a push is done to a repository, and allow our GitHub commit messages to manipulate our Taiga Scrum board. Let's see what that looks like. Let's go back to our backlog. Let's look at our Scrum task board. So let's say I'm writing some code for deliver feedback over email. Okay, so that's number 13. So I'm going to pretend we're doing that over here in my GitHub window. I'm going to edit the README for my project. I'm going to say, this is awesome. Doesn't matter. I'm just making a modification to a file. I save the file. I go back to my get status. I have changed one thing. I'm going to add that thing. I am going to commit with a message. Now, here's where the integration happens. In the message, I might say, awesome with a capital A. Obviously, I want to have better commit messages. I'm making this up. But at the end, I need to put in a specific string that tells Taiga what I'm referring to. TG for Taiga dash 13. 13 is the task I want to manipulate. And then I can use what's called a slug to change the status. In this case, I'm going to use a slug to go from in progress to closed. Okay? And let's see if this works. So I commit. Now realize all I've done is commit locally. I have to push. Enter my info. All right, it's pushed. I can go over to my, let me go back to my repository view here. I have a commit. There's my awesome. There's my commit message. If you even go to the webhook page, back to this page I was on, you can see the recent pushes that were done, even problems that you perhaps had, a problem I had. You can look at the commit number that you get, this 17137 EDF, that's a commit identifier. You can find that in your list to see if that happened. I can go back to my repo, and then I can go back to my task board, and if the webhook picked up on that, then boom, over here it shows up as closed. I didn't even have to refresh the page. All right, I didn't move that manually. That was moved by that webhook sending a message from GitHub over to Taiga and manipulating the state of the task. So if you set up this webhook integration, hey, guess what? If you're careful about your git commit messages, you can actually manipulate your Scrum board, your Taiga Scrum board automatically, and wire these two things together so you don't have to go into two different tools to do things. I think that's a pretty cool integration on things. The watch should also happen. I'm logging into my Gary email. If you remember, Gary got assigned one of the tasks. So guess what? I was, by default, since it was assigned to me, the task gets updated. I get an email and it says, hey, from new to in progress, from assigned to you. All right. So you can, by default, you're going to get these messages. You can go into your own profile settings if you don't like getting email like that. But it's kind of nice. This is informing you of when something's been manipulated on the Scrum board associated with your user. I'm going to go delete that. So this is how I expect you to progress. I mean, you can manually move things across the board. You can use the GitHub commit messages. There wasn't anything about that that's required. It's just a nice feature. Other things that you can do. Taiga has an issues tracker. However, I personally, and one thing we'll talk about a bit later on, GitHub has a set of issues on its project as well. I haven't created any issues for this thing. I personally prefer using GitHub issues to Taiga issues. But honestly, if you prefer Taiga issues yourself, go ahead and use it. There is a wiki built in. GitHub also has a wiki, but this actually has, Taiga has a nice lightweight wiki, so for you to actually create some entries to share with some team, you have some kind of knowledge capital, ideas that you want to create and share and collaboratively edit. That's what wikis are for. You can do that. Pretty rudimentary wiki, but a wiki nonetheless. You can look at who's on your team. It's clicking me as night shift because I'm doing this at 8:30 at night right now. You can, identify different roles. I'm not going to talk about these kinds of things. It gives you pretty, these kind of notion of funny roles associated with things based on the kind of activities you do on your Scrum board. Maybe it's for fun. Maybe it's not important for what we're doing. You might want to check it out. But you can also administer your project team here. If you need to change anything, you will get a power rating, give you an idea of how active different folks are. I don't use the power rating in any way in grading you, but it's an informal measure of activity within a team. By the way, you can also go manipulate your own settings, so you have your own profile. So you can, for example, change your gravatar. You can see your activity. You can see what you voted on, contacts, all this fun stuff. None of this is anything that I need you to do. It may be something you choose to do. Notifications. You may decide what project you want to get notifications on. The default is to set to things that you're involved. You can turn it all the way off. You can say, hey, I want none for this one. And you could say, I want all for something else. All right. You got a password problem. You can change your password. And again, you can manipulate your own user profile, put up a fun image. Again, all stuff. Nothing in this is required that you do. All stuff that may be fun and also just frankly may make you just a little bit more productive. Okay, I just went back to the home page. Let me go back to the project. The last thing are the admin settings. The admin settings has a lot of stuff on here, and there's a lot you can customize. Some things I don't want you to customize. There are attributes like this that define your statuses, but it will tell you what the slugs are for the things that you need to put in a commit message. These are the task statuses and their slugs when you move things across the board. Issues have states as well. I don't want you to change these. I don't want us to get into the model of doing custom Scrum boards, but that's an advanced feature. Maybe you need different kinds of columns, more columns, less columns, whatever. That's a real feature that some teams use. The integrations, that's where you may have webhooks where you're notifying things out of Taiga. That's where the GitHub was before that I showed you. There are plugins. So they're particularly for some popular tools for collaboration, HipChat. Slack is one that I really like. So you can actually create a webhook and cross-post things over to Slack that automatically happen. Slack, again, not a required thing in this project. If you choose to use it, please invite CST316 ASU@gmail.com to your Slack channels. But you can even integrate and post things from your Slack over into your specific project. So all kinds of advanced features, but again, our basic thing here is to use the product backlog and the sprint task board features to add user stories to the product backlog, to estimate them with story points, to go to our task board, to assign, manipulate and assign tests and move them across the board. And again, once everything gets moved across, then we can mark the story is done. All right. Basic introduction to Taiga. It's a tool that takes a little getting used to. I want to show you some of the things we're not using and I don't care about. And the main things I care about is the product backlog and the sprint backlog with the corresponding scrum board or task board, as Taiga calls it. Okay, so that's it for this. I also recommend, again, the 15 minutes or so of Taiga tutorials to get you going. But based on everything we've talked about with Agile so far, this should be enough to get you started.